She was supposed to die out there. Everyone in Hollow Creek expected Elena Mercer to vanish into the prairie like smoke. Another widow ground down by hunger, grief, and a frontier that didn't forgive weakness. They didn't know she'd survived worse than loneliness. They didn't know about the canyon, the hidden mare, or the dangerous rancher whose land she'd accidentally trespassed. And they sure as hell didn't expect her to become the only thing standing between Iron Ridge Ranch and total destruction. This is a story about a woman the world tried to bury, and the man too broken to believe in second chances. It's about survival, betrayal, gunfire in the dark, and two people who had every reason to walk away from each other but didn't. If you want to see how far grit and courage can take someone when everything else is gone, stay with me until the end. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far Elena's fight travels across the world. Now let's go back to the beginning. Back to the day she walked into Hollow Creek with nothing but a burlap sack and a heart full of ghosts. The wagon had stopped moving 3 days ago. Elena Mercer sat beside her husband's body for 2 of those days, waiting for something. Clarity, maybe, or the will to keep going. Thomas had died hard. Fever first, then the shakes, then the kind of silence that meant his lungs had finally quit fighting. She'd wrapped him in the only blanket they had left, and buried him in a shallow grave scraped out with her bare hands and a broken shovel blade. No words, no tears left by then, just dirt and wind and the low cry of vultures circling overhead. On the 3rd day, she took what she could carry and started walking. By the time Hollow Creek came into view, Elena had worn through the soles of her boots. Her dress was stiff with dust and sweat, her hair a tangled mess beneath a wool shawl that had seen better years. She didn't look like someone worth noticing. She looked like someone the world had already finished with. The town wasn't much. A single dirt road flanked by weathered storefronts, a crooked church steeple, a saloon that smelled like wet wood and old whiskey even from a distance. A few people glanced her way as she limped past the general store. Their eyes didn't linger. She was just another drifter, another face the frontier would swallow whole. Elena stopped outside the mercantile and leaned against the hitching post, catching her breath. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but she didn't have coin to spare. What little money they'd had went into the ground with Thomas. The door swung open and a heavy-set woman in a faded apron stepped out. A crate of canned goods balanced on her hip. She glanced at Elena, then froze. "You lost?" Elena straightened. "No, ma'am. Just passing through." "Passing through to where?" "Don't know yet." The woman's mouth tightened. "Well, you can't loiter here. This ain't a charity house." "I wasn't asking for charity." "Good, 'cause you won't find it." The woman turned and disappeared back inside, the door slamming shut behind her. Elena exhaled slowly and started walking again. She'd expected coldness. It was how the world worked now. Still, it stung. She made it another block before her legs gave out. She sank onto the edge of a water trough, gripping the wooden frame to keep herself upright. Her vision swam. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Maybe 3. Time had started blurring together. "Hey!" Elena looked up. A man stood a few feet away, tall and lean, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of stone and left to weather. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his eyes, but she could feel the weight of his stare. "You sick?" he asked. "No." "You look sick." "I'm fine." He studied her for a long moment, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small cloth bundle. He tossed it to her. She caught it reflexively. "Bread," he said. "Eat it before you fall over." Elena stared at the bundle, then back at him. "Why?" "Because if you die on this street, someone's got to move the body. Easier if you just eat." He turned and walked away before she could respond. Elena unwrapped the cloth. Inside was half a loaf of dense brown bread, still warm. Her hand shook as she tore off a piece and shoved it into her mouth. It tasted like salvation. She finished the loaf in minutes, then sat there clutching the empty cloth, trying not to cry. Kindness had become such a rare thing that even a scrap of it felt like a wound. By nightfall, Elena had made her way to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. She found an abandoned line shack half buried in tall grass, its roof sagging and its door hanging crooked on rusted hinges. There wasn't much, but it was shelter. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air smelled like rot and old smoke. A broken chair sat in one corner. A rusted stove squatted against the far wall. The floor was dirt, uneven and cold. Elena dropped her burlap sack and sank onto the ground, leaning against the wall. Her whole body ached, her feet throbbed, but she was inside. She was out of the wind. She closed her eyes and let herself breathe. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The next few days were a blur of survival. Elena set snares along the creek bed and checked them each morning, pulling up rabbits and the occasional prairie chicken. She boiled wild roots and dandelion greens in a dented pot she'd found buried in the dirt outside the shack. She learned which plants were safe and which would make her sick. She learned to move quietly, to stay out of sight, to keep her head down. The people of Hollow Creek didn't bother her. They didn't even notice her. She was a ghost drifting along the edges of their world, invisible and irrelevant. And that suited her just fine. One morning, about a week after her arrival, Elena followed the creek deeper into the valley, searching for new places to set traps. The land opened up into a wide canyon, its walls rust-red and jagged, dotted with scrub pine and patches of wild grass. It was quiet here, isolated, the kind of place where a person could disappear. She was halfway through the canyon when she heard it, a low, desperate whinny. Elena froze, listening. The sound came again, sharper this time, edged with panic. She moved toward it, picking her way over loose rocks and clumps of sagebrush. The canyon floor narrowed, the walls pressing in on either side. And then she saw it. A horse. It was trapped between two boulders, its hind leg wedged at an awkward angle, its coat slick with sweat. The animal thrashed as Elena approached, eyes rolling white with fear. "Easy," Elena murmured, holding up her hands. "Easy now." The horse stilled, its sides heaving. Elena crouched a few feet away, studying the situation. The leg wasn't broken. She could see that much. But the horse had wedged itself in tight, and every time it pulled, it only made things worse. She moved slowly, speaking in a low, steady voice. "I'm going to help you, all right? But you got to trust me." The horse snorted, but it didn't bolt. Elena edged closer, placing a hand on the animal's shoulder. Its coat was warm and trembling beneath her palm. She could feel the rapid thud of its heartbeat. "Good," she whispered. "That's good." It took nearly an hour to free the leg. Elena had to dig out rocks, shift the boulders inch by inch, and coax the horse to shift its weight just right. By the time the animal finally pulled free, Elena's hands were raw and bleeding, her dress soaked with sweat. The horse staggered a few steps, testing the leg. It limped, but it could walk. Elena wiped her forehead with the back of her hand and let out a shaky breath. "You're welcome." The horse turned and looked at her, its dark eyes unreadable. Then it limped away, disappearing into the canyon shadows. Oh, Elena didn't think much about the horse after that. She had her own problems to worry about, like the fact that her snares were coming up empty more often than not, and winter was creeping closer every day. But 3 days later, the horse came back. Elena was outside the line shack, skinning a rabbit, when she heard the soft thud of hooves. She looked up and froze. The mare stood at the edge of the clearing, watching her. Elena set down the knife slowly. "What are you doing here?" The horse didn't move. Elena stood and took a cautious step forward. The mare's ears flicked, but it didn't retreat. "You lost?" The horse snorted. Elena couldn't help it. She smiled. It was the first time she'd smiled in weeks, maybe months. She walked over to the mare and ran a hand along its neck. The animal leaned into the touch, letting out a soft, contented sigh. "You're a strange one," Elena murmured. The mare stayed with her that night, grazing in the tall grass near the shack. And the next night. And the night after that. Elena didn't try to chase it off. The truth was, she liked the company. 2 weeks passed. The mare grew stronger, its limp fading until it could run full speed across the valley without hesitation. Elena spent her mornings checking traps and her afternoons brushing the horse's coat, talking to it like it could understand. "I think I'll call you Ash," she said one afternoon, running her fingers through the mare's mane. "You've got that gray streak right here, see? Like ash from a fire." Ash snorted and nudged her hand, looking for more attention. Elena laughed softly. It felt good to laugh. It felt almost normal. But normal didn't last. One morning, Elena was filling a bucket at the creek when she heard the sound of hooves, a lot of them. She looked up and saw a group of riders cresting the hill, moving fast. Her stomach dropped. She abandoned the bucket and ran back to the shack, heart pounding. Ash was grazing near the door, oblivious. "Get out of here," Elena hissed, waving her arms. "Go on, get." Ash tossed her head but didn't move. The riders were closer now. Elena could hear their voices, rough and low. She grabbed Ash's mane and tried to pull the horse toward the trees, but it was too late. The riders came into view, and 5 men on horseback, all of them hard-faced and armed. At the front was a man in a black duster, his jaw set like iron, his eyes cold enough to freeze blood. He pulled his horse to a stop a few feet from Elena and stared down at her. "That's my horse," he said. Elena's breath caught. The man swung down from his saddle, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made the air feel smaller. "Where'd you find her?" he demanded. Elena forced herself to meet his gaze. Canyon, about 2 miles east, she was trapped. Between some boulders. "I got her loose." The man's eyes narrowed. "And then you kept her." "I didn't keep her. She followed me. Followed you." "Yeah." One of the other riders laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "She expect us to believe that, Colt?" The man, Colt, didn't take his eyes off Elena. "You know what happens to horse thieves around here?" Elena's pulse hammered in her ears. "I'm not a thief." "Then why's my horse standing in your yard?" "I told you, she followed me." Colt stepped closer, and Elena fought the urge to back up. His gaze swept over her. The threadbare dress, the worn boots, the dirt under her nails. "Who are you?" he asked. "Elena Mercer." "Where are you from?" "East." "That's not an answer." Elena's jaw tightened. "I'm a widow. I came here looking for work. Didn't find any, so I made do." Colt studied her for a long, tense moment. Then he turned to one of his men. "Check the shack." "Wait." Elena started, but the man was already dismounting. He pushed past her and disappeared inside. Elena stood there, fists clenched, humiliation burning in her chest. The man emerged a minute later. "Nothing much. Some traps, a cook pot, no saddles, no tack." Colt's expression didn't change. He walked over to Ash and ran a hand along the mare's flank, checking for injuries. Ash stood perfectly still, calm under his touch. "She's healthy," Colt said, almost to himself. "Better than when she went missing." Elena crossed her arms. "I fed her, brushed her, made sure she didn't get hurt again." Colt turned back to her. "Why?" "Because she needed help, and you just happened to be the one who found her." "Yeah, I did." Colt's jaw worked. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but he didn't. Instead, he grabbed Ash's lead and swung back into his saddle. "You're lucky I don't haul you in front of the sheriff." Elena's hands shook, but she kept her voice steady. "I didn't steal your horse." Colt looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Stay out of trouble, Mrs. Mercer." Then he turned his horse and rode off, the rest of his men following. Elena stood there until they disappeared over the hill. Then her legs gave out, and she sank to the ground, gasping for air. She'd survived, barely. But something told her this wasn't over. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the encounter in her mind. The way Colt had looked at her, like she was something dangerous, like she was a threat. It wasn't fair. She'd saved that horse. She'd cared for it, and now she was the one who looked like a criminal. She sat by the stove, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the dying embers. A knock on the door made her jump. Elena stood slowly, heart racing. "Who's there?" "Open the door." She recognized the voice. Colt. Elena's hands trembled as she pulled the door open. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology," he said. Elena blinked. "What?" "I checked with the ranch hands. The mare went missing during a storm, got spooked, and ran. You didn't steal her." Elena folded her arms. "I told you that." "I know." "And you didn't believe me." Colt's jaw tightened. "No, I didn't." "Why not?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because people lie." Elena studied him, the hard lines of his face, the tension in his shoulders. He looked like a man who'd been burned too many times to trust easily. Well, she said quietly, I don't. Colt met her gaze. I'm starting to see that. They stood there in silence, the night air cold and still between them. Finally, Colt cleared his throat. You said you were looking for work. Elena's heart skipped. Yeah, I've got a stable that needs tending, horses that need breaking. It's hard work, long days, but it pays. Elena stared at him. You're offering me a job? If you want it. She didn't hesitate. I do. Colt nodded once. Be at Iron Ridge by sunrise. Don't be late. Then he turned and walked back into the darkness, leaving Elena standing in the doorway, hope flickering in her chest for the first time in months. Iron Ridge Ranch sat like a fortress against the horizon, sprawling and raw, carved out of land that didn't want to be tamed. Elena saw it from a mile off as she walked the dusty road in the pre-dawn cold, her breath coming out in thin clouds. The main house was 2 stories of dark wood and stone, flanked by barns and corrals that stretched in every direction. Horses moved in the paddocks like shadows, their shapes barely visible in the gray light. She'd left the line shack before the sun even thought about rising, her few belongings stuffed back into the burlap sack. She didn't know if this job would last a day or a year, but it didn't matter. It was a chance, and chances were something she'd learned not to waste. A man was waiting by the stable when she arrived, older than Colt, with a weathered face and a crooked back. He looked her up and down without much interest. You the widow? He asked. Elena Mercer. Roy. I run the stables. He jerked his head toward the barn. Boss said you know horses. I do. We'll see. He turned and walked inside, not bothering to check if she followed. Elena stepped into the barn, and the smell hit her immediately. Hay and leather, and the warm, earthy scent of animals. Horses lined the stalls on either side, some watching her with curious eyes, others ignoring her entirely. The place was bigger than she'd expected, organized but worn, like everything had been used hard and often. Roy stopped in front of a stall near the back. Inside was a young gelding, muscled and agitated, pacing in tight circles. This one's got a temper, Roy said, through the last 2 hands who tried to saddle him. You think you can handle it? Elena set her sack down and stepped closer to the stall. The gelding's ears flattened and he snorted, stamping one hoof. What's his name? She asked. Doesn't have one. Hasn't earned it yet. Elena reached out slowly, letting the horse see her hand. He tossed his head, but he didn't bite. You've been rough with him, she said quietly. Roy bristled. We've been trying to break him. That's the problem. She slipped into the stall before Roy could object. The gelding backed into the corner, eyes wide, but Elena didn't crowd him. She just stood there, hand extended, waiting. You gonna stand there all day? Roy called from outside. Elena didn't answer. She kept her breathing slow, her posture relaxed. The gelding watched her, nostrils flaring. Then, after what felt like forever, he took a step forward. Elena stayed perfectly still. The horse moved closer, sniffing her hand, then her sleeve. She let him investigate, didn't try to grab or force anything. Finally, the gelding pressed his nose against her palm. Elena smiled. There you go. She ran her hand along his neck, speaking in a low, steady voice. The horse's muscles relaxed under her touch, the wildness in his eyes fading into something closer to curiosity. Roy leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. I'll be damned. He's not mean, Elena said. He's scared. Scared of what? Being hurt, Roy grunted. Well, you got him calm. Let's see if you can saddle him. Elena spent the next hour working with the gelding, moving slowly, letting him get used to the saddle blanket first, then the saddle itself. He tensed a few times, ready to bolt, but Elena stayed patient. By the time she cinched the saddle tight, the horse was standing quietly, ears forward. Roy watched the whole thing in silence. When she finally led the gelding out of the stall, he shook his head. You got a gift, he said. Elena shrugged. I just listen. Most folks don't bother. She handed him the lead rope. What else needs doing? Roy's expression shifted, something like approval flickering across his face. Follow me. He put her to work immediately. Mucking stalls, hauling water, checking hooves, oiling tack. The jobs were endless and hard, and by midday Elena's back was screaming and her hands were blistered, But she didn't complain. She just kept moving, kept working, kept proving she belonged here. The other ranch hands gave her sidelong glances but didn't say much. A couple of them muttered to each other when they thought she couldn't hear, but Elena ignored it. She dealt with worse than suspicious men. It wasn't until late afternoon that she saw Colt again. He came into the barn while she was brushing down one of the mares, his boots heavy on the packed dirt floor. Elena glanced up but didn't stop working. "Roy says you're good," Colt said. "Roy talks too much." Colt's mouth twitched, almost like he wanted to smile. "He also says the gelding didn't throw you." He didn't need to be thrown. He needed to be understood. Colt studied her for a moment, arms crossed. "You always this sure of yourself?" Elena set down the brush and turned to face him. "I'm not sure of much, but I know horses." He didn't respond right away, just looked at her like he was trying to figure out whether she was real or some kind of trick. "There's a bunkhouse out back," he said finally. "You can stay there. Meals are at the main house, sunrise and sunset. Don't be late." Elena nodded. "Thank you." Colt turned to leave, then paused. "And Elena?" She looked up. "Don't make me regret this." He walked out before she could answer. Elena exhaled slowly and went back to brushing the mare. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from relief. She had a job, a place to sleep, a chance to rebuild something that looked like a life. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had in a long time. The bunkhouse was small and drafty, with a row of narrow beds and a wood stove that barely worked. Two other hands were already inside when Elena arrived. Both men, both looking at her like she'd wandered into the wrong room. "You lost?" one of them asked. He was young, maybe 20, with a sunburned face and a smirk that made Elena's stomach tighten. "No," she said. "Colt told me to bunk here." The other man, older and grizzled, spat into a tin cup. "Colt's lost his mind bringing a woman out here." Elena dropped her sack onto the bed nearest the door. "I'm not here to decorate. I'm here to work." "Work?" the younger one repeated, like it was a joke. "Doing what exactly?" "Whatever needs doing." The older man snorted. "Good luck with that." Elena ignored them and started making up the bed with the thin blanket she'd brought from the line shack. The men watched her for a minute, then lost interest and went back to their own business. She lay down that night fully dressed, boots still on, staring at the ceiling. The bunkhouse was cold, and she could hear the wind rattling the walls. Somewhere outside, a horse whinnied. She thought about Thomas, about the grave she'd left behind, about the life they'd planned that had turned to dust before it even started, and then she closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under. The days blurred together after that. Elena woke before dawn, worked until her muscles screamed, ate whatever food was shoved in front of her, and collapsed into bed at night too tired to dream. The other hands kept their distance, but Roy started giving her more responsibility. Breaking young horses, treating injuries, even helping with the foaling when one of the mares went into labor in the middle of the night. She was good at it, better than good. The horses responded to her in ways they didn't respond to anyone else, and even the men who'd sneered at her started to notice. But the townspeople were a different story. One afternoon, Roy sent her into Hollow Creek to pick up supplies. Grain, salt blocks, a few tools the blacksmith had repaired. Elena hitched up the wagon and made the trip alone, trying not to think about the last time she'd walked these streets. The general store was quiet when she stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. The same heavy-set woman from before stood behind the counter, her expression souring the moment she saw Elena. "What do you want?" the woman asked. Elena pulled out the list Roy had given her. "I need these items for Iron Ridge." The woman snatched the list and scanned it, her mouth pressed into a thin line. "You're working for Colt Brennan now." "Yes, ma'am." "Humph." The woman disappeared into the back, muttering something Elena couldn't quite hear. She returned a few minutes later with the supplies, dumping them onto the counter with more force than necessary. "That'll be $18. Elena counted out the money carefully and handed it over. The woman didn't say thank you, didn't say anything at all. As Elena loaded the wagon outside, she felt eyes on her. She looked up and saw a group of women standing across the street, whispering behind their hands. One of them pointed, and the others laughed. Elena's jaw tightened. She finished loading the supplies, climbed onto the wagon seat, and drove out of town without looking back. When she returned to the ranch, Roy took one look at her face and frowned. They give you trouble? He asked. Nothing I can't handle, Roy grunted. Folks in that town got small minds and big mouths. Don't let them get to you. Elena nodded, but the words stuck with her anyway. That night, she was hauling feed to the back pasture when she saw Colt standing by the fence, staring out at the darkening hills. He didn't turn when she approached, but she could tell he knew she was there. You settling in all right? He asked. Elena set down the bucket. Well enough? Roy says you're doing good work. Roy's being generous. Colt glanced at her. He's not the generous type. Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They stood in silence for a while, the wind picking up around them. The horses in the pasture grazed quietly, dark shapes against the fading light. I heard what happened in town, Colt said finally. Elena's stomach dropped. Who told you? Doesn't matter, people talk. She crossed her arms. I didn't cause any trouble. I didn't say you did. Then why bring it up? Colt turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something almost like concern in his eyes. Because you're working for me now, and that means when they talk about you, they're talking about this ranch. Elena's temper flared. So I'm a liability. I didn't say that either. Then what are you saying? Colt's jaw worked. I'm saying you've got a target on your back whether you deserve it or not. And I need to know you can handle that. Elena met his gaze, refusing to flinch. I've handled worse. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Colt turned back to the fence. Storm's coming in tonight. Make sure the barn doors are latched. Already done. Good. Elena picked up the bucket and started to walk away, then paused. Colt? He looked over his shoulder. Thank you, she said, for the job, for taking a chance on me. Colt's expression softened just a little. Don't thank me yet. Winter's coming, and it's going to be hell. Elena nodded and headed back to the barn, but as she walked, she felt something warm settle in her chest. Hope, maybe, or something close to it. The storm hit just after midnight. Elena woke to the sound of thunder cracking overhead and rain hammering against the bunkhouse roof. She sat up, disoriented, and realized the other two hands were already gone, probably checking the livestock. She pulled on her boots and coat and ran outside into the downpour. The wind was brutal, tearing at her clothes and hair. Lightning flashed, illuminating the ranch in stark white bursts. She made it to the barn and found chaos. One of the stall doors had blown open, and a mare was loose, wild-eyed and panicked. Roy was trying to corner her, but every time he got close, she bolted. Elena didn't think. She just moved. She slipped past Roy and positioned herself between the mare and the open door, arms spread wide. The horse reared, hooves flashing, but Elena held her ground. Easy, she called over the storm. Easy, girl. The mare came down hard, snorting and shaking her head. Elena took a step forward, slow and deliberate. The wind whipped around them, but she kept her voice steady, her movements calm. The mare's ears flicked forward. Elena reached out, and the horse led her. She grabbed the halter and led the mare back into her stall, latching the door tight. Roy stared at her, drenched and breathing hard. You're either brave or crazy. Elena wiped the rain from her face. Little of both. The storm raged all night. Elena and the other hands worked through it, checking fences, calming spooked animals, patching a section of roof that had started to leak. By the time the sun came up, she was exhausted, soaked to the bone, and covered in mud. But the ranch was still standing. Colt found her in the barn just after dawn. She was sitting on a hay bale, trying to wring water out of her hair. Heard you saved one of the mares last night, he said. Elena looked up. Just doing my job. Roy said she almost trampled you. She didn't, though. Colt's mouth twitched again, that almost smile. You keep this up, and people might start thinking you're indispensable. I'm not. Maybe not, but you're close. He handed her a tin cup filled with something hot. Coffee, she realized, strong and bitter and perfect. Elena wrapped her hands around the cup and let the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. Thank you. Colt nodded and turned to leave, then hesitated. You ever wonder why I gave you this job? Elena frowned. Because you needed the help? Partly. He looked back at her, his expression unreadable. But mostly because you didn't ask for it. You just stood there and told me the truth, even when you knew I didn't believe you. Elena didn't know what to say. Not many people do that anymore, Colt added quietly. Then he walked out, leaving her alone with her coffee and the faint, stubborn flicker of something she didn't dare name yet. The weeks passed, and Elena became part of the rhythm of Iron Ridge. She learned which horses were temperamental and which were steady, which hands would pull their weight and which would slack off the moment Roy turned his back. She learned that Colt was hard but fair, that he worked longer hours than anyone else, and that he never asked his men to do something he wouldn't do himself. She also learned that he was lonely. It was in the way he stood apart from the others during meals, the way he disappeared into his office at night and didn't come out until morning, the way he looked at the horizon like he was searching for something that had been lost a long time ago. One evening, Elena was walking past the main house when she saw lamplight spilling from one of the windows. She stopped, curious, and peered inside. Colt was sitting at a desk, surrounded by ledgers and paperwork, his head in his hands. He looked exhausted, defeated. Elena hesitated, then knocked on the door. Colt looked up, startled. He crossed to the door and opened it, frowning. "Something wrong?" "No, I saw the light. Thought maybe you could use some help." He stared at her. "With what?" "Whatever's got you looking like the world's ending." Colt's jaw tightened, and for a moment Elena thought he'd tell her to leave, but then he stepped aside. "Come in." The office was small and cluttered, every surface covered with papers. Elena glanced at the desk and saw columns of numbers, all of them scratched out and rewritten. "Ranch finances?" she asked. Colt nodded grimly. "We're barely breaking even. Winter's going to hit hard, and I don't know if we've got enough saved to make it through." Elena picked up one of the ledgers and scanned the entries. The numbers were messy, disorganized, some of them clearly wrong. "Who's been keeping these?" she asked. "Me." She looked at him. "You're not very good at it." Colt let out a short, humorless laugh. "No, I'm not." Elena sat down at the desk and started going through the ledger line by line, fixing errors, reorganizing the columns. Colt watched her in silence, arms crossed. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he asked finally. "My father ran a store back east. I used to help him with the books." "Why didn't you mention that before?" "You didn't ask." Colt shook his head, but there was something almost like amusement in his eyes. "You're full of surprises, Mrs. Mercer." Elena didn't look up. "So are you." They worked together until late into the night, Elena fixing the ledgers while Colt explained the ins and outs of the ranch, how much they spent on feed, how much they made selling horses, what debts were still outstanding. It was tedious work, but Elena found herself oddly comforted by it. There was something steady about numbers, something reliable. When they finally finished, Colt leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "We might actually survive this winter," he said. Elena smiled. "Might?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment the hardness in his face softened. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Elena's chest tightened. "You would have figured it out." "Maybe, but it would have taken a lot longer." They sat in silence, the lamplight flickering between them. Then Colt stood and walked to the door, holding it open. "It's late. You should get some rest." Elena nodded and stepped outside, the cold night air hitting her like a slap. She turned back, ready to say something. She didn't know what, but Colt had already closed the door. She walked back to the bunkhouse slowly, her mind racing. Something had shifted tonight, something fragile and uncertain, but real, and it scared her more than she wanted to admit. The next few weeks were quieter. Elena kept working the stables, kept fixing the ledgers in the evenings when Colt asked. The other hands started treating her less like an outsider and more like one of them. Even Roy cracked a smile once or twice. But the town was a different story. Every time Elena went into Hollow Creek, the whispers followed. Women crossed the street to avoid her. Men stared. The shopkeeper refused to make small talk, and once, someone threw a rock at the wagon as she drove past. Elena didn't tell Colt. She figured he had enough to worry about. But one afternoon, Roy pulled her aside. "You hear what they're saying in town?" he asked. Elena's stomach sank. "What?" "That you're a horse thief who seduced Colt into giving you a job. That you're using him to get your hands on the ranch." Elena's face burned. "That's not true." I know it's not, but they don't care about the truth. She looked away, fists clenched. Why do they hate me so much? Roy sighed. Because you're different. Because you showed up out of nowhere and didn't beg for scraps. People don't like that. Makes them nervous. Elena swallowed hard. What do I do? Keep your head down, do your work, let them talk themselves out. But the talking didn't stop. And 2 days later, everything got worse. Elena was in the barn when she heard shouting from the main yard. She stepped outside and saw a group of men on horseback, townspeople, led by a man with a thick beard and a badge pinned to his vest. The sheriff. Colt was standing in front of them, arms crossed, his face like stone. What's this about, Garrett? Colt asked. The sheriff shifted in his saddle. Got some complaints, Colt. Folks saying you hired a horse thief. Colt's jaw tightened. She's not a thief. You sure about that? Yes. The sheriff glanced past Colt and spotted Elena standing by the barn. That her? Colt didn't move. Leave her out of this. Can't do that. People want answers. Elena stepped forward before Colt could stop her. I didn't steal anything. The sheriff looked her up and down, his expression cold. That's what they all say. I found a horse trapped in a canyon. I freed it and cared for it. That's the truth. One of the men behind the sheriff spat into the dirt. Convenient story. Elena's temper flared. It's not a story. It's what happened. Enough, Colt said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Elena works for me. She's done nothing wrong. If you've got a problem with that, take it up with me. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. You defending her, Colt? I'm stating facts. The two men stared at each other, the air crackling with unspoken threats. Finally, the sheriff backed down. Fine, but if anything else goes missing, I'm coming back, and I won't be asking nice. He turned his horse and rode off, the other men following. Elena stood there, shaking, her heart pounding in her ears. Colt turned to her, his expression hard. Get inside. Colt, now. She didn't argue. She walked back to the barn, feeling the weight of every eye on the ranch. Later that night, Colt found her in the bunkhouse. The other hands had gone into town, leaving her alone. He stood in the doorway, silent, his face unreadable. I didn't steal that horse, Elena said quietly. I know. Then why do they think I did? Colt stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Because it's easier to believe you're a liar than to admit they're wrong. Elena looked down at her hands. I'm making things harder for you. You're making things better. She looked up, surprised. Colt sat down on the bench across from her, his shoulders heavy. This ranch was falling apart before you got here. The horses were wild, the ledgers were a mess, and I was one bad season away from losing everything. He met her eyes. You changed that. Elena's throat tightened. I'm just doing my job. No, Colt said quietly. You're doing more than that. The air between them felt thick, charged with something Elena couldn't name. Colt stood abruptly, like he'd said too much. Don't let them run you off, Elena. You belong here. Then he left, and Elena sat alone in the dark, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't know what was happening between them, but she knew it was dangerous. And dangerous it was, because the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, meaner, until they reached the ears of a man Elena had never met, but whose name she'd heard more than once around the ranch. Rhett Vance. She first learned about him from Roy, who mentioned him in passing while they were re-showing one of the workhorses. The old man's face darkened the moment the name came up. Stay away from that one if you ever see him, Roy said, hammering a nail into place. He's got a grudge against Colt that goes back years. What kind of grudge? Elena asked. Roy glanced around like he was checking for listeners, then lowered his voice. Vance used to work here. Colt caught him stealing from the ranch, skimming money, selling horses on the side. Fired him on the spot and made sure everyone in 3 counties knew why. Elena frowned. So he's bitter. Bitter don't cover it. The man's got poison in his veins. Last I heard he was running with a gang out past the ridge. Outlaws, mostly. The kind who'd shoot you for looking at them wrong. Elena felt a chill run down her spine, but she pushed it aside. Well, he's not my problem. Roy gave her a long look. Let's hope it stays that way. But 2 days later, Rhett Vance walked into the saloon in Hollow Creek and made Elena his problem. She wasn't there to see it happen, but she heard about it soon enough. One of the younger ranch hands, a kid named Danny, came back from town looking pale and shaken. "What's wrong with you?" Roy asked when he saw the kid's face. Danny swallowed hard. "Vance was in the saloon. He was talking about Elena." Elena, who'd been brushing down one of the mares, froze. "What did he say?" Danny looked at her, then looked away. "He said you're working with the thieves who hit the ranch a few weeks back, that you're feeding them information, helping them plan another raid." Elena's stomach dropped. "That's a lie." "I know it is, but he's got people believing it." Roy cursed under his breath. "Did he say anything else?" Danny hesitated. "He said Colt's a fool for trusting a woman who showed up out of nowhere, and that when the next attack comes, it'll be her fault." Elena's hand started shaking. She set down the brush and took a breath, trying to steady herself. "Does Colt know?" "Not yet," Danny said, "but he will soon. Word spreads fast." Elena turned and walked out of the barn before anyone could stop her. She needed air. She needed to think. But thinking didn't help because the damage was already done. By the time the sun set, half the town believed Rhett Vance's lies. And by the next morning, even some of the ranch hands were looking at her with suspicion. Colt called her into his office just after breakfast. She walked in to find him standing by the window, his back to her, shoulders tense. The ledgers were open on the desk, but she could tell he hadn't been looking at them. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. Colt turned, and the look on his face made her chest tighten. He wasn't angry. He was conflicted. "I heard what Vance is saying," he said quietly. Elena crossed her arms. And I need to know the truth." She stared at him. "You're asking me if I'm a traitor. I'm asking you to tell me what I should believe." Elena's temper flared. "You should believe what you already know, that I've worked harder than anyone on this ranch, that I've done nothing but help you since the day I got here." "I know that." "Then why are we having this conversation?" Colt's jaw worked. "Because people are watching, Elena. The sheriff, the town, my own men. If I stand by you and Vance is telling the truth, he's not. Then I lose everything." Elena's breath caught. She took a step back, feeling like she'd been slapped. "You don't trust me." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Colt ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched into every line of his face. "This isn't about trust. It's exactly about trust." Elena interrupted, her voice shaking. "Either you believe me or you don't. There's no middle ground." Colt looked at her for a long moment, his expression torn. And in that silence, Elena saw the truth. He didn't know what to believe. She turned and walked out of the office without another word, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. She made it to the bunkhouse, grabbed her burlap sack, and started shoving her few belongings inside. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely tie the drawstring. Roy appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing?" "Leaving." "Don't be stupid." Elena whirled on him. "He thinks I'm a liar, Roy. He thinks I'm working with thieves." "He's scared," Roy said quietly. "There's a difference." "I don't care what he is. I'm not staying where I'm not wanted." She pushed past him and walked out into the yard, the sack slung over her shoulder. A few of the hands stopped what they were doing to watch her go, but no one tried to stop her. She was halfway to the road when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Elena didn't turn around. She just kept walking. "Elena, stop!" Colt's voice. She ignored it. "Damn it, Elena, stop!" She spun around, anger blazing in her chest. "What do you want, Colt?" He pulled his horse to a halt a few feet away and dismounted, his face hard. "You can't just leave." "Watch me." "Where are you going to go?" "Anywhere that's not here." Colt stepped closer, and Elena held her ground. "You think running's going to solve anything?" "I think staying's going to get me killed," she shot back. "Vance is spreading lies, the town already hates me, and now even you don't believe me, so yeah, I'm leaving." Colt's expression cracked, just a little. "I never said I didn't believe you." "You didn't have to." He looked away, jaw clenched. "I've been burned before, Elena. People I trusted, people I cared about, they turned on me, lied to me, used me. And you think I'm doing the same? I think I'm trying not to make the same mistake twice." Elena's throat tightened. "I'm not them, Colt." "I know." His voice was rough, almost broken. But that doesn't make it easier. They stood there in the dust and the wind, two people who'd been hurt too many times to trust easily. Finally, Colt spoke again. If you leave, Vance wins. He gets what he wants. Me isolated, the ranch vulnerable. Is that what you want? Elena's grip on the sack loosened. No. Then stay. Help me prove him wrong. She looked at him, searching his face for some sign that he meant it, that he wasn't just saying what he thought she wanted to hear. What she saw was fear and honesty and something that looked almost like desperation. I'm not asking you to trust me, Colt said quietly. I'm asking you to give me a chance to earn it back. Elena's resolve wavered. She thought about the ranch, the horses, the fragile life she'd started to build here. She thought about Roy and Danny and even the grumpy gelding who'd finally started letting her ride him. And she thought about Colt, standing in front of her looking like a man who'd finally realized he'd made a mistake. One more chance, she said finally. That's all you get. Relief flooded Colt's face. That's all I need. Elena dropped the sack and walked past him, heading back toward the ranch. Colt followed, leading his horse, and for a while neither of them spoke. But something had shifted again. Something fragile, but real. And this time, Elena wasn't sure if it was hope or foolishness that made her stay. The next few days were tense. Elena went back to work in the stables, but the atmosphere on the ranch had changed. Some of the hands avoided her. Others watched her too closely, like they were waiting for her to slip up. Danny was one of the few who still treated her normally. He brought her coffee one morning while she was checking the fence line, his expression apologetic. I'm sorry about what happened, he said. I shouldn't have told you what Vance said. Made things worse. Elena took the coffee. You were just being honest. Yeah, but still. Danny scuffed his boot in the dirt. For what it's worth, I don't believe him. Vance is a snake. Apparently not everyone agrees with you. Danny shrugged. People believe what they want to believe. Doesn't make it true. Elena smiled faintly. You're smarter than you look, kid. Don't tell Roy. He'll make me do more work. She laughed, and it felt good. Normal. But the normalcy didn't last. 2 nights later, Elena was in the barn late, checking on a mare who'd been acting skittish all day, when she heard voices outside. She moved to the door and peered out. 3 men stood near the corral, their faces half hidden in shadow. She didn't recognize any of them, but something about the way they moved made her stomach tighten. One of them glanced toward the barn, and Elena pulled back, heart pounding. She waited, listening. Sure this is the right place? One of the men asked. Vance said the woman works here. If we see her, we follow her, see where she goes, who she talks to. Elena's blood ran cold. And if she spots us? She won't. The men moved off toward the edge of the property, disappearing into the darkness. Elena stood frozen, her mind racing. Vance had sent men to watch her, to follow her. She had to tell Colt. She found him in his office, going over the same ledgers they'd fixed together weeks ago. He looked up when she burst in, his expression immediately shifting to concern. What's wrong? There were men outside, 3 of them. They said Vance sent them to watch me. Colt was on his feet in an instant. Where are they now? They left, headed toward the ridge. Colt grabbed his gun belt from the hook by the door and strapped it on. Stay here. Colt. Stay here, Elena. He was out the door before she could argue. Elena paced the office, her nerves frayed. She wanted to follow him, to help, but she knew he was right. If Vance's men saw her, it would only make things worse. Colt returned an hour later, his face grim. Did you find them? Elena asked. No, but I found tracks. They were here, just like you said. Elena sank into a chair. What does Vance want? To destroy me. Colt's voice was flat, emotionless. And he's using you to do it. Why? Colt looked at her, and for the first time she saw the full weight of what he was carrying. Because he knows you're the one thing keeping this ranch alive. If he can turn people against you, turn me against you, then everything falls apart. Elena's chest tightened. So what do we do? We don't give him what he wants. Colt's eyes hardened. We keep working, keep proving him wrong, and we stay ready. Ready for what? For whatever he's planning next. The attack came 3 days later. Elena was in the paddock with one of the younger horses when she heard the gunfire. Sharp cracks echoing across the valley, followed by shouts. She dropped the lead rope and ran toward the sound, her heart hammering. The main gate was under siege. 4 men on horseback were shooting at the ranch hands, trying to force their way inside. Roy was crouched behind a water trough, returning fire with a rifle. Danny was pinned down near the barn. Elena spotted Colt running toward the gate, his gun already drawn. "Get back!" he shouted when he saw her. But Elena didn't listen. She grabbed a pitchfork leaning against the fence and sprinted toward the barn, staying low. One of the attackers wheeled his horse toward Danny, raising his gun. Elena didn't think. She just moved. She swung the pitchfork with everything she had, catching the man's arm. He yelped and dropped the gun, his horse rearing. Danny scrambled to his feet and grabbed the fallen weapon, firing a shot that sent the rider retreating. "You're insane!" Danny shouted at Elena. "Probably." The gunfire continued for another few minutes, chaotic and deafening, until finally the attackers pulled back, disappearing into the hills. Silence settled over the ranch, broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and the creak of saddle leather. Colt walked over to Elena, his face pale. "You could have been killed. So could Danny. That's not the point." Elena dropped the pitchfork, her hands shaking. "Then what is the point, Colt?" He stared at her, and for a moment she thought he was going to yell. But then his expression softened, and he reached out, gripping her shoulder. "The point is I can't lose you," he said quietly. Elena's breath caught. Before she could respond, Roy called out from the gate. "Colt, you need to see this." Colt let go of her shoulder and walked over. Elena followed. Roy was holding a piece of paper, his face grim. One of them dropped this. Colt took the paper and read it, his jaw tightening with every word. "What does it say?" Elena asked. Colt handed it to her without a word. The message was short, scrawled in rough handwriting. This was a warning. Next time, we finish it. And the woman dies first. Elena's blood turned to ice. Colt's voice was low and dangerous. "Vance isn't just after the ranch. He's after you." Elena looked up at him, fear and fury warring in her chest. "Then let him come. I'm not running." Colt's eyes met hers, and something fierce and unspoken passed between them. "No," he said. "You're not." But even as he said it, Elena could see the worry etched into his face, the fear that he was leading her into something she couldn't survive. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Iron Ridge, Elena wondered if staying had been the right choice after all. That night, Colt called a meeting in the main house. All the ranch hands gathered in the front room, their faces tense and wary. Colt stood at the front, his arms crossed. "You all know what happened today. Vance and his men attacked us. They'll do it again." One of the older hands, a man named Garrett, spoke up. "Why don't we just turn the woman over, give Vance what he wants?" Elena's stomach twisted, but she kept her face neutral. Colt's expression went cold. "Because Elena didn't do anything wrong, and I don't negotiate with men who threaten my people." Garrett scowled. "Your people? She's been here 2 months. We've been here years. And in 2 months, she's done more for this ranch than some of you have done in all that time." The room went silent. Colt's voice was firm, unyielding. "Elena stays. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave right now." No one moved. Colt nodded. "Good. Now here's what we're going to do. We double the watch, we arm everyone, and we prepare for another attack, because it's coming, and when it does, we're going to be ready." The men dispersed slowly, muttering among themselves. Elena stayed behind, her chest tight. Colt walked over to her. "You all right?" "I'm making this worse for you." "No, Vance is making this worse. You're just the excuse he's using." Elena looked up at him. "Why are you defending me, Colt? Really?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because you're the first person in a long time who didn't want something from me. You just wanted to work, to survive. And I respect that." Elena's throat tightened. "I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." "You won't be." Colt's voice was firm. "I promise." But promises, Elena had learned, were fragile things. And in a world as hard as this one, they broke more often than they held. The next morning, Elena woke before dawn, her mind made up. She couldn't stay. Not anymore. Vance's threat had been clear, and as long as she was at Iron Ridge, everyone here was in danger. She packed her things quietly, moving through the bunkhouse like a ghost. The other hands were still asleep, their snores filling the small space. She slipped outside and started walking, the cold air biting at her skin. She'd made it to the edge of the property when she saw movement in the distance. Riders. A lot of them. Elena's heart sank. She recognized the man at the front immediately. Rhett Vance. Tall, lean, with a face that looked like it had been carved from cruelty. And he was heading straight for Iron Ridge. Elena's mind raced. If she kept walking, she'd be safe. Vance wouldn't waste time chasing her when he had the ranch in his sights. But if she left, Colt and the others would be outnumbered, outgunned. They'd die. Elena stood there, frozen, her whole body trembling. Then she turned around and started running back toward the ranch, faster than she'd ever run in her life. She burst into the barn, gasping for air. "Colt! Roy! Anyone!" Colt emerged from the main house, his expression alarmed. "What?" "Vance is coming," Elena panted. "Right now. Maybe 20 men." Colt's face went pale. "How close?" 10 minutes, maybe less." Colt spun and started shouting orders. "Roy, get everyone armed. Danny, bar the gates. Move." The ranch exploded into motion, men grabbing rifles and taking positions. Colt turned to Elena. "Get in the house. Stay down." "No." "Elena, I'm not hiding while you fight my battle." Colt's jaw clenched. "This isn't your battle." "Yes, it is." They stared at each other, the chaos swirling around them. Finally, Colt nodded. "Stay close to me, and don't do anything stupid." Elena grabbed a rifle from the rack. "No promises." The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and Elena's hands tightened on the gun. Vance and his men crested the hill, a wall of horses and guns and violence, and Iron Ridge prepared to fight for its life. Vance pulled his horse to a stop just outside rifle range, his men fanning out behind him in a ragged line. The morning sun broke over the ridge, casting long shadows across the dirt, and for a moment everything went still. Elena crouched behind a water trough next to Colt, her rifle pressed against her shoulder, her heart slamming against her ribs. She could see Vance clearly now. The sharp angles of his face, the cold calculation in his eyes, the way he sat his horse like a man who'd never lost a fight and didn't plan to start. "Brennan," Vance's voice carried across the yard, mocking and loud. "You got something that belongs to me." Colt didn't move. "I don't have anything of yours, Vance. That woman, the thief. Hand her over and we'll ride out peaceful." Elena's breath hitched, but Colt's jaw just tightened. "She's not a thief," Colt called back, "and she's not leaving." Vance laughed, the sound harsh and humorless. "You really gonna die for some widow you picked up off the street?" "If that's what it takes." Vance's smile faded. "Then you're a bigger fool than I thought." He raised his hand, and the world exploded into gunfire. Elena ducked as bullets tore into the wood above her head, splinters raining down. Colt returned fire, his shots steady and precise. Around the yard, the ranch hands were shooting from every angle, the barn, the house, the fence line. Vance's men charged forward, some on horseback, others on foot, spreading out to flank the ranch. Roy took down one of them with a clean shot to the shoulder, sending the man tumbling from his saddle. Danny fired from the barn loft, his shots wild but effective enough to force two riders to retreat. "They're trying to circle around," Elena shouted over the noise. Colt swore and shifted his position, firing at a group of men trying to breach the side gate. "Roy, cover the east fence." Roy was already moving, his old legs carrying him faster than Elena would have thought possible. A bullet slammed into the trough inches from Elena's face, and she jerked back, her ears ringing. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely aim, but she forced herself to breathe, to focus. She spotted a man climbing over the fence near the corral and fired. The shot went wide, but it was close enough to make him drop back down. "Good," Colt muttered beside her. "Keep them pinned." The fight dragged on, brutal and chaotic. Smoke filled the air, mixing with dust and the smell of gunpowder. One of Vance's men made it to the barn and set fire to a stack of hay bales. Flames licked up the side of the building, and Danny came scrambling down from the loft, coughing and cursing. "Get water!" Colt yelled. Elena dropped her rifle and ran for the pump, her lungs burning. She filled 2 buckets and hauled them toward the barn, sloshing water with every step. Danny grabbed one and threw it on the flames while she went back for more. By the time they got the fire under control, 3 more of Vance's men had broken through the gate. Colt met them head on, his gun blazing. One went down. Another stumbled back, clutching his leg. The third raised his rifle, aiming straight at Colt's back. Elena didn't think. She just grabbed the pitchfork leaning against the barn wall and ran. She drove the pitchfork into the man's side with everything she had. He screamed and went down hard, the rifle clattering out of his hands. Elena yanked the pitchfork free, her whole body shaking, and stumbled backward. Colt spun around, his eyes wide. "Elena, I'm fine," she gasped, even though she wasn't sure that was true. Colt grabbed her arm and pulled her behind cover just as another volley of shots tore through the air. "Stay down!" But staying down wasn't an option. Vance's men were everywhere now, pouring into the yard like a flood. The ranch hands were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of ammunition. Elena scanned the chaos, her mind racing. They couldn't win this fight. Not like this. Then her eyes landed on the back pasture, where the half-wild horses Colt had been planning to break were penned up. There had to be at least 50 of them, maybe more, all of them skittish and untamed. An idea sparked in her mind. Reckless, dangerous, probably stupid, but it might work. She turned to Colt. "I need you to trust me." He looked at her, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. "What are you Just trust me." Before he could stop her, Elena bolted toward the back pasture, keeping low and zigzagging to avoid the gunfire. Bullets kicked up dirt at her heels, but she didn't stop. She reached the fence and vaulted over it, landing hard on the other side. The horses scattered, spooked by the noise and the smell of smoke. Elena moved slowly, hands raised, speaking in a low, steady voice. "Easy, easy now." One of the mares, a gray with wild eyes and a scarred shoulder, stepped forward, nostrils flaring. Elena reached out, and the mare didn't bolt. "Good girl," Elena whispered. "I need your help." She grabbed a fistful of the mare's mane and swung herself up onto its back. The horse tensed, ready to buck, but Elena leaned forward, her voice calm and firm. "Come on, let's go." She dug her heels in, and the mare shot forward like a bullet. The rest of the herd followed, a thundering mass of muscle and panic. Elena aimed them straight at the center of the yard, where Vance's men were regrouping. She didn't have a saddle, didn't have reins, just her grip on the mare's mane and the hope that this insane plan would work. The horses hit the yard like a stampede. Vance's men scattered, shouting and diving out of the way. Horses crashed into barricades, knocked over barrels, sent men sprawling into the dirt. The chaos was total, overwhelming, and Elena used every ounce of strength she had to stay on the mare's back as it careened through the mayhem. She spotted Vance near the gate, his face twisted with rage. He raised his gun, aiming straight at her. Elena yanked the mare to the side, and the shot went wide. Colt appeared out of nowhere, tackling Vance to the ground. The two men grappled in the dust, fists flying. Vance was bigger, meaner, but Colt fought like a man with nothing left to lose. Elena slid off the mare and ran toward them, but one of Vance's men grabbed her from behind, his arm locking around her throat. She clawed at his arm, gasping for air, her vision starting to blur. Then Roy was there, slamming the butt of his rifle into the man's head. The grip around Elena's throat loosened, and she stumbled forward, coughing. "You all right?" Roy asked. Elena nodded, even though her head was spinning. Across the yard, Colt had Vance pinned, his gun pressed to the outlaw's temple. Vance spat blood into the dirt, his eyes full of hate. "Go ahead," Vance hissed. "Do it." Colt's hand shook, his finger on the trigger. For a long, terrible moment, Elena thought he was going to pull it. But then he yanked the gun away and hauled Vance to his feet. "You're not worth it." He shoved Vance toward Roy. "Tie him up. We're handing him over to the sheriff." The fight was over. Vance's men were either dead, wounded, or fleeing into the hills. The ranch was a wreck. Fences broken, buildings scorched, blood staining the dirt. But they'd won. Elena sank to the ground, her whole body trembling. She couldn't stop shaking, couldn't catch her breath. Colt dropped down beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "You did it." Elena looked up at him, tears blurring her vision. "I thought we were going to die." "So did I." They sat there in the wreckage, too exhausted to move, while the ranch hands started picking up the pieces. The sheriff arrived an hour later with a small posse, his expression grim. He took one look at the destruction and let out a low whistle. "Hell of a fight," he said. Colt stood, his arms crossed. Vance started it. The sheriff's eyes flicked to where Vance sat tied to a fence post, glaring at everyone who passed. That's so? You can ask any of my men. Vance attacked us, twice, and he's been spreading lies about Elena to cover his tracks. The sheriff looked at Elena, who was still sitting in the dirt, her dress torn and her face streaked with soot. That true, ma'am? Elena met his gaze. Yes, sir. It is. The sheriff studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. We'll take Vance in. Get statements from everyone here. One of the deputies hauled Vance to his feet. The outlaw shot Elena a look full of venom. This isn't over. Colt stepped between them, his voice cold. Yeah, it is. The sheriff and his men loaded Vance and the surviving attackers onto a wagon and rode out, leaving the ranch in uneasy silence. Elena stood slowly, her legs shaking. Roy appeared at her side, offering a hand. You're braver than most men I know, he said quietly. Elena managed a weak smile. Or stupider. Little of both. Roy squeezed her shoulder. But you saved us. Don't forget that. He walked off, leaving Elena alone with Colt. Colt looked at her, his expression unreadable. That stampede? That was your idea? Elena nodded. I didn't know if it would work. It was reckless. I know. And brilliant. Elena blinked. What? Colt's mouth twitched into the ghost of a smile. You heard me. They stood there, the morning sun climbing higher, the ranch slowly coming back to life around them. I'm sorry, Colt said finally. Elena frowned. For what? For doubting you. For not defending you sooner. For... He broke off, running a hand through his hair. For almost losing you. Elena's throat tightened. You didn't lose me. I almost did. When you ran out there with those horses, I thought... His voice cracked. I thought I was going to watch you die. Elena stepped closer, her heart pounding. But I didn't. Colt looked down at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, the walls around his heart seemed to crumble. No, you didn't. He reached out, hesitating, then cupped her face in his hand. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost you, he whispered. Elena's breath caught. You won't. Promise me. I promise. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers, and they stood there in the ruins of the ranch, holding on to each other like they were the only solid things left in the world. The next few days were a blur of repairs and testimony. The sheriff came back to take statements, and one by one, the ranch hands told the truth. That Vance had attacked, that Elena had fought alongside them, that she'd saved the ranch. The townspeople heard the stories too. And slowly, grudgingly, the whispers started to change. Elena was in the barn one afternoon, brushing down the gray mare who'd carried her through the stampede, when a woman from town appeared in the doorway. It was the same woman from the general store, the one who told Elena to move along all those weeks ago. Elena tensed, but the woman held up her hands. I'm not here to cause trouble. Then why are you here? The woman looked uncomfortable. To apologize. Elena blinked. What? I was wrong about you. We all were. The woman's voice was stiff, like the words hurt to say. You're not a thief. You're not a liar. And you risked your life to save people who treated you like dirt. Elena didn't know what to say. The woman shifted her weight. Anyway, I just wanted you to know, you're welcome in town. For what that's worth. She turned and walked out before Elena could respond. Elena stood there, stunned, the brush forgotten in her hand. Roy appeared a moment later, grinning. You hear that? Yeah. Told you they'd come around. Elena shook her head, a laugh bubbling up in her chest. I don't believe it. Believe it. You're a hero now. Elena's smile faded. I'm not a hero, Roy. I just did what needed to be done. That's what heroes do. He walked off, whistling, and Elena went back to brushing the mare, her thoughts spinning. That night, Colt found her sitting on the porch of the main house, staring out at the stars. Mind if I join you? He asked. Elena shook her head, and he sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. They sat in silence for a while, the night air cool and still. I've been thinking, Colt said finally. About what? About this ranch. About what it needs to survive. Elena glanced at him. And? Colt turned to her, his expression serious. It needs you. Elena's heart skipped. Colt, I'm not just talking about the horses or the ledgers or any of that. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm talking about you, here, permanently. Elena's breath caught. What are you saying? Colt reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. I'm saying I want you to stay, not as a hired hand, as a partner. Elena stared at him. A partner? In the ranch, in everything. Her mind was spinning. Why? Because this place is better with you in it. I'm better with you in it. His voice dropped. And because somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as someone who worked for me and started seeing you as someone I can't imagine my life without. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Colt, You don't have to answer now, he said quickly. Just think about it. Elena shook her head. I don't need to think about it. Colt's face fell. Oh, I'm staying. His eyes widened. You are. Yeah. Elena smiled through her tears. I am. Relief flooded Colt's face, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. Elena buried her face in his chest, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek, steady and strong. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. The town of Hollow Creek held a meeting a week later. The sheriff stood at the front of the room, flanked by 2 deputies, and read the charges against Rhett Vance and his men. Theft, assault, attempted murder. The crowd listened in silence, and when the sheriff asked if anyone wanted to speak, Elena stood. Every eye in the room turned to her. She walked to the front, her hands clasped in front of her, and faced the people who'd hated her, doubted her, tried to run her out of town. I know what you all thought of me, she said quietly, and I don't blame you. I was a stranger, an outsider, someone easy to suspect. She paused, her voice growing stronger. But I'm not your enemy. I never was. I came here looking for a chance to survive, and I found more than that. I found a home, a purpose, people worth fighting for. She looked at Colt, who was standing near the back, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on her. And I'm not leaving, she said, no matter what anyone says. The room was silent. Then slowly, one person started clapping, then another, and another. By the time Elena walked back to her seat, the whole room was applauding. Colt was waiting for her outside. He didn't say anything, just took her hand and squeezed it, and Elena squeezed back. They walked back to Iron Ridge together, side by side, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and red. The ranch was still a mess, still scarred from the fight, but it was standing, and so were they. Elena looked up at Colt. What happens now? Colt smiled, and it was the first real, unguarded smile she'd ever seen from him. Now we rebuild. Together? Together. And for the first time since Thomas died, since the wagon stopped moving, since she walked into Hollow Creek with nothing but a burlap sack and a broken heart, Elena believed in the future again. Rebuilding wasn't romantic. It was hard, dirty work that left Elena's hands blistered and her back aching every night. The barn roof needed patching where the fire had scorched through. The fence line had holes big enough to lose a horse through. The main gate hung crooked on its hinges, and half the water troughs had bullet holes that needed plugging. But Elena threw herself into it with everything she had, and Colt worked right beside her, the two of them moving through the days like they'd been partners for years instead of months. The ranch hands noticed. Roy mentioned it one morning while they were hauling lumber for the new section of fence. You two got a rhythm now, he said, grinning. Like you can read each other's minds. Elena wiped sweat from her forehead. We've just been working together a lot. Uh-huh. That what you're calling it? Elena shot him a look, but she couldn't quite hide her smile. The truth was, something had shifted between her and Colt after the fight. It wasn't just trust, though that was part of it. It was something deeper, something neither of them had words for yet. They'd fought side by side, bled together, nearly died together. And when the dust settled, they'd both realized they didn't want to go back to being strangers. Colt started asking her opinion on things that had nothing to do with horses, whether to sell the yearlings now or wait until spring, which suppliers to use for feed, how to handle a dispute between two of the hands. Elena would sit with him in his office late into the night, the ledgers spread out between them, and they'd talk through problems like they were building something that belonged to both of them. Because, in a way, they were. One evening, about 2 weeks after the fight, Colt found Elena in the barn grooming the gray mare. The horse had become her favorite, the one who'd carried her through the stampede and somehow survived without a scratch. "You ever gonna give her a name?" Colt asked, leaning against the stall door. Elena ran the brush along the mare's neck. "I've been calling her Ash because of the gray in her coat." "Ash," Colt tested the name, nodding. "I like it." "She's earned it." Colt stepped into the stall, running a hand along Ash's flank. The mare stood calm under his touch, her eyes half closed. "She trusts you." "Took a while, but yeah." Colt looked at Elena, his expression thoughtful. "You've got a gift with them. I've never seen anyone work horses the way you do." Elena shrugged. "I just listen." "It's more than that." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You don't try to break them, you meet them where they are." Elena set down the brush. "That's how it should be. Breaking a horse just makes them scared. But if you earn their trust, they'll give you everything they've got." Colt was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is that what you did with me?" Elena's breath caught. She turned to face him, her heart beating a little faster. "What do you mean? I was pretty broken when you got here. Closed off. Didn't trust anyone." His voice was low, almost hesitant. "But you didn't push. You just kept showing up, kept proving you were solid. And somewhere along the way, I started believing it." Elena's throat tightened. "Colt, I'm not good at this," he interrupted, running a hand through his hair. "Talking about feelings, I mean. Never have been. But I need you to know that you changed something in me. Something I thought was dead." Elena stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "What was it?" "Hope." The word came out rough, like it hurt to say. "I stopped hoping for anything good a long time ago. Figured the world had taken everything it was going to take from me, and all I could do was survive. But then you showed up, and you fought for this place like it mattered, like I mattered, and I started thinking maybe there was more to life than just getting through the day." Elena's vision blurred with tears. "You do matter, Colt. You always did." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "So do you." They stood there in the quiet of the barn, the smell of hay and leather around them, and Elena felt something settle deep in her chest. Something that felt a lot like home. Colt cleared his throat, looking almost embarrassed. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know." Elena smiled, wiping at her eyes. "I'm glad you told me." He nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the stall door. "Oh, and Elena?" "Yeah?" "I talked to the carpenter in town. He's going to start work on the house next week." Elena frowned. "What work?" Colt's mouth twitched into a small smile. "Adding a room. Figured if you're staying, you shouldn't have to sleep in the bunkhouse anymore." Elena's heart swelled. "Colt, you don't have to." "I want to." His eyes met hers, warm and steady. "You're not just a hand anymore, Elena. You're family." He walked out before she could respond, leaving her standing there with tears streaming down her face and a smile she couldn't wipe away. The carpenter, a quiet man named Hank, showed up the following Monday with a wagon full of lumber and a teenage apprentice who couldn't have been more than 15. They worked steadily, framing out a new room on the backside of the main house, and Elena watched the progress with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. She'd never had a room of her own. Not really. Growing up, she'd shared a tiny space with two sisters. After she married Thomas, they'd lived in a wagon or a tent, always moving, never settling. And now here was Colt, building her something permanent. It felt too good to be true. One afternoon, while Hank and his apprentice were hammering away, Elena was working in the paddock when she heard a horse approaching. She looked up and saw a woman riding toward the ranch, her posture straight and confident. It was the woman from the general store. Elena wiped her hands on her trousers and walked over to the fence. "Can I help you?" The woman dismounted, holding the reins loosely. "I wanted to talk to you, if you've got a minute." Elena nodded, and the woman tied her horse to the post. "My name's Margaret," the woman said. "I don't think we were ever properly introduced." "Elena." Margaret's mouth twitched. "I know. Everyone knows who you are now." Elena waited, not sure where this was going. Margaret took a breath. I came to apologize, properly this time. Not just for how I treated you, but for how this whole town treated you. Elena crossed her arms. You already apologized. I know, but it wasn't enough. Margaret's voice was firm, almost defiant. You saved lives, Elena. You risked everything to fight for people who'd done nothing but judge you, and we didn't deserve that. Elena looked away, uncomfortable. I didn't do it for thanks. I know, that's what makes it matter. Margaret stepped closer. Look, I'm not good at this either, but I wanted you to know that you've got friends in town now, real ones, people who see what you did and respect you for it. Elena's chest tightened. I appreciate that. Margaret nodded, then glanced toward the house. I also heard you're staying on at Iron Ridge, as Colt's partner. News travels fast. It does. Margaret's expression softened. For what it's worth, I think it's a good thing. Colt's been alone too long, and you've been through hell. Maybe you can help each other heal. Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. Margaret untied her horse and swung back into the saddle. Take care of yourself, Elena, and take care of him too. She rode off, leaving Elena standing by the fence, her thoughts swirling. That night, Elena sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over the hills. The carpenter had finished framing the new room, and the smell of fresh-cut wood hung in the air. Colt came out and sat beside her, 2 tin cups of coffee in his hands. He handed her one, and she took it gratefully. Margaret came by today, Elena said. Colt raised an eyebrow. Yeah, what'd she want? To apologize. And to tell me I've got friends in town now. Colt snorted. Took 'em long enough? Elena smiled. Better late than never, I guess. They sat in silence for a while, sipping their coffee and watching the sky turn from gold to purple. You ever think about what comes next? Colt asked suddenly. Elena glanced at him. What do you mean? After we finish fixing the ranch. After things settle down. He paused. What do you want, Elena? It was a simple question, but it hit her hard. She'd spent so long just trying to survive that she hadn't let herself want anything. I don't know, she said honestly. I guess I just want to keep doing this. Working the horses. Building something that lasts. Colt nodded slowly. That's enough for you? Elena thought about it. Yeah, I think it is. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. What about family? Kids? A life outside the ranch? Elena's heart skipped. I don't know if I'm cut out for that anymore. Why not? She set down her cup, her hands trembling slightly. Because I already lost one family, Colt. I don't know if I can survive losing another. Colt was quiet for a long time. Then he reached over and took her hand. You won't. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll do everything in my power to make sure it doesn't happen. His grip tightened. And I can promise I'm not going anywhere. Elena looked at him, tears stinging her eyes. You mean that? Yeah, I do. She squeezed his hand back, and they sat there until the stars came out, holding on to each other like they were the only solid thing in the world. The weeks turned into months, and winter crept in with frost and cold winds that rattled the barn doors. The ranch settled into a new rhythm, one that included Elena as more than just a hired hand. Colt started introducing her as his partner when people came by, and the hand stopped looking at her like an outsider. Roy retired at the end of November, his back finally giving out after too many years of hard labor. He called Elena into the barn the day before he left, his expression serious. I got something for you, he said, pulling a worn leather journal from his coat. Elena took it, confused. What is this? Everything I know about horses. Been writing it down for years. He tapped the cover. Figured you're the one who should have it now. Elena's throat tightened. Roy, I can't. You can, and you will. He smiled. You're the best hand I've ever worked with, Elena. Better than me, even, and that's saying something. Elena hugged him, hard. Thank you. For everything. Roy patted her back awkwardly. Take care of this place. And take care of Colt. He needs you more than he'll ever admit. I will. Roy left the next morning, riding off into the gray winter light, and Elena stood on the porch watching until he disappeared over the ridge. Colt came up beside her, his hands shoved in his pockets. You all right? Yeah, just gonna miss him. Me too. They stood there in silence, the wind biting at their faces. "I hired a new hand," Colt said after a while. "Kid from town, named Sam. He starts next week." Elena nodded. "Good. We need the help." "Yeah." Colt glanced at her. "But he's not Roy." "No one is." Colt put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Elena leaned into him, grateful for the warmth. Christmas came and went quietly. Elena cooked a small meal in the main house, and she and Colt ate together by the fire, the wind howling outside. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. Colt gave her a new saddle, the leather soft and beautifully tooled. Elena ran her fingers over it, almost speechless. "This is too much," she whispered. "No, it's not." "Colt, you're stuck with it. No arguing." Elena laughed, wiping at her eyes. "Thank you." She gave him a new coat, thick and warm, the kind that would keep him from freezing during the long winter nights. He put it on immediately, grinning like a kid. "Best gift I've had in years," he said. They sat by the fire late into the night, talking about everything and nothing, and Elena realized she was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. It was a feeling she'd almost forgotten. Spring came slowly, thawing the frozen ground and bringing new life to the ranch. The horses grew restless, eager to run, and Elena spent her days working with the young ones, teaching them to trust. One afternoon, she was in the paddock with a skittish colt when Colt came out to watch. He leaned against the fence, arms crossed, a small smile on his face. "You make it look easy," he called. Elena laughed. "It's not." "I know. That's what makes it impressive." The colt finally let her touch his neck, and Elena rewarded him with a handful of oats. Colt opened the gate and stepped inside. "I've been thinking," he said. Elena glanced at him. "About what?" "About us." Her heart skipped. "What about us?" Colt took a breath, looking nervous for the first time since she'd met him. "I want you to know that this," he gestured around the ranch, "isn't just a partnership to me anymore." Elena's pulse quickened. "What is it then?" "It's home. And you're the reason why." He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "I know we've both been hurt. I know we're both scared of losing what we've got. But I don't want to keep pretending this is just business." Elena's hands trembled. "Colt, I love you, Elena." The words came out raw, honest. "I don't know when it happened, but it did. And I need you to know that." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. "I love you too." Colt's face broke into a smile, the kind that made him look 10 years younger. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Then stay," he whispered, "not just as a partner, as my wife." Elena pulled back, staring at him. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Yeah, I am." Her heart felt like it might burst. "Yes. Yes. Yes." Colt laughed and kissed her, and Elena kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it, all the fear and hope and love she'd been carrying for months. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "We're really doing this?" Elena asked. "We really are." They got married in May, in a small ceremony at the ranch with the hands and a few people from town as witnesses. Margaret came, along with the sheriff and Hank the carpenter. Even Danny cried a little, though he tried to hide it. Elena wore a simple dress, cream-colored and borrowed from Margaret. Colt wore his best shirt and the coat Elena had given him for Christmas. They stood under the oak tree near the barn, holding hands, and promised to build a life together. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. After the ceremony, they held a small gathering in the yard. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing and laughter and more food than Elena had seen in years. She danced with Colt under the stars, his arms strong around her, and for the first time since Thomas died, she let herself believe in forever again. The summer was good to them. The ranch flourished, the horses sold well, and Elena and Colt worked side by side, building something neither of them could have built alone. Elena took over the breeding program, carefully selecting which mares to pair with which stallions, and by fall they had a crop of foals that were stronger and healthier than any Colt had raised before. Word spread, and buyers started coming from counties away, willing to pay top dollar for Iron Ridge horses. Colt handled the business side, but he always consulted Elena before making any major decisions. They were partners in every sense of the word, and it showed. One evening in late September, Elena was sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Colt came out and sat beside her. "I've got something to tell you," he said. Elena looked at him, concerned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. It's good news, actually." He smiled. "We're out of debt, completely. And we've got enough saved to get through the next 3 winters, easy." Elena's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious." She threw her arms around him, laughing. "Colt, that's incredible." "It's because of you. You saved this place." Elena shook her head. "We saved it, together." Colt kissed her forehead. "Yeah, we did." They sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. "You ever think about where we'd be if you hadn't found that mare?" Colt asked. Elena smiled. "All the time." "I think about it too. How one small thing changed everything." "It wasn't small," Elena said quietly. "Not to me." Colt took her hand. "What do you mean?" Elena thought about it, choosing her words carefully. "That mare taught me something I'd forgotten. That even when you're trapped and scared and hurting, there's always a way out. You just have to be willing to accept help when it comes." Colt was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is that what I was? Help?" Elena looked at him, her eyes soft. "You were more than that. You were a second chance." Colt squeezed her hand. "So were you." They sat in silence, watching the stars come out one by one. "I used to think I was done," Elena said eventually, "that I'd used up all my chances at happiness, that the best I could hope for was survival. And now? Now I know better." She turned to face him. "Happiness isn't something you get once and then it's over. It's something you build, every day, with people who matter." Colt smiled. "That's pretty wise." Elena laughed. "Don't let it go to my head." But later, lying in bed beside Colt, listening to his steady breathing, Elena thought about what she'd said, about second chances and building happiness and choosing to trust even when it scared you. She thought about Thomas and the life they'd planned that never came to be. She thought about the wagon that stopped moving and the grave she'd left in the dirt, and she realized that grief didn't disappear just because you found something good again. It stayed with you, a quiet ache in the background. But it didn't have to define you. Thomas had loved her, and she'd loved him, and that was real. But so was this. So was Colt, and the ranch, and the life they were building together. She could hold both truths in her heart, the loss and the love, the past and the future. And maybe that was what healing really looked like. Not forgetting, not pretending the pain never happened, but learning to carry it without letting it crush you. Winter came again, colder and harsher than the year before. But this time, Elena wasn't alone in a drafty line shack, wondering if she'd survive until spring. She was warm and safe in the main house, with Colt beside her and a future spread out in front of her like an open road. One night, a blizzard hit so hard they had to bring the horses into the barn to keep them from freezing. Elena and Colt worked for hours, moving animals, securing doors, making sure everything was ready for the storm. By the time they finished, they were both exhausted, their clothes soaked with snow. They collapsed by the fire, shivering, and Colt pulled Elena close, wrapping a blanket around both of them. "You think the ranch will hold?" Elena asked. "It will? We built it strong." Elena smiled. "Yeah, we did." They fell asleep like that, tangled together by the fire. And when Elena woke in the morning, the storm had passed. The world outside was white and quiet, clean and new. She stood on the porch, breathing in the cold air, and felt a kind of peace she hadn't known in years. Colt came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "How far we've come." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "Yeah?" "Yeah." Elena leaned back against him. "A year ago, I was nobody, just a widow with nothing to her name, hiding in a shack and trying to survive. And now look at me. Now you're the woman who saved Iron Ridge." Elena shook her head. "I didn't save it alone." "No, but you were the one who started it, the one who gave me a reason to fight." Elena turned in his arms, looking up at him. "You gave me a reason, too." They kissed, slow and sweet, and when they pulled apart, Colt smiled. "Come on," he said. "Let's go check on the horses." They walked to the barn together, hand in hand, their breath clouding in the cold air. Inside, Ash nickered when she saw Elena, trotting over to the stall door. Elena scratched behind the mare's ears, grinning. "Hey girl, you doing all right?" Ash nudged her hand, looking for treats. Colt laughed. "She's got you trained. She earned it." Colt leaned against the stall, watching Elena with the mare. "You know, I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "We should start training her, really training her. She's smart enough, and she trusts you. Could be the best horse we've ever had." Elena's eyes lit up. "You think so?" "I know so." Over the next few months, Elena worked with Ash every day, teaching her to respond to commands, to trust her instincts, to move with confidence. The mare was a natural, quick, and agile, and by spring she was the finest horse on the ranch. People started asking to buy her, offering ridiculous amounts of money, but Elena always said no. "She's not for sale," she'd tell them. "She's family." Colt never pushed her to reconsider. He understood. That summer, Elena discovered she was pregnant. She told Colt one evening after dinner, her hands shaking as she said the words. "I'm going to have a baby." Colt stared at her, his face going pale. "What?" "A baby. Our baby." For a long moment he didn't move. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "Yeah, I'm sure." Colt pulled back, his eyes shining. "We're having a baby." Elena laughed, tears streaming down her face. "We are." He kissed her, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like idiots. "I'm going to be a father," Colt said, like he couldn't quite believe it. "And I'm going to be a mother." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, and Elena felt something shift inside her, a kind of fullness she hadn't expected. She'd thought she was done with this part of her life, done with hope, done with family, done with believing in anything beyond the next day. But here she was, pregnant, married, building a life she'd never imagined possible. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Elena was sick for the first few months, and there were days when she could barely get out of bed. But Colt was there every step of the way, taking over her work with the horses, bringing her tea and dry bread, sitting with her when the nausea got too bad. "You don't have to do this," Elena said one morning, her voice weak. "Yes, I do." "Colt, we're in this together, remember?" He took her hand. "You don't get to carry it alone." Elena squeezed his hand, too tired to argue. By the time fall came around, she was feeling better. Her belly had started to show, and she moved a little slower, but she was back in the barn, working with the horses she loved. Colt was nervous, constantly worried something would go wrong, but Elena refused to be fragile. "I'm not made of glass," she told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from lifting a saddle. "I know, but humor me." Elena rolled her eyes but let him take the saddle. "You're impossible. And you're stubborn. That's why you love me." Colt smiled. "Yeah, it is." The baby came in February, during another blizzard. The midwife from town made it to the ranch just in time, and Colt paced the hallway outside the bedroom, looking like he might pass out. Danny, who'd been promoted to foreman after Roy left, clapped him on the shoulder. "She's going to be fine, boss." "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do. Elena's the toughest person I've ever met. She'll get through this." Colt wanted to believe him, but the hours dragged on, and every time he heard Elena cry out, his chest tightened with fear. Finally, just before dawn, the midwife opened the door. "You've got a daughter," she said, smiling, "and she's healthy." Colt didn't wait. He pushed past the midwife and into the room. Elena was lying in bed, pale and exhausted, but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. Colt's breath caught. "Come meet her," Elena whispered. He crossed the room on shaking legs and sat on the edge of the bed. Elena shifted the blanket, revealing a tiny face with dark eyes and a shock of black hair. "She's perfect," Colt breathed. "She is." Colt reached out, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. She gripped it immediately, her fingers impossibly small. "What should we name her?" Elena asked. Colt thought for a moment. "What about Hope?" Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Hope? I love it." They sat there together, the three of them, as the storm raged outside and the sun started to rise. And Elena thought about how strange and beautiful life could be, how you could lose everything and still find a way to build something new, how the world could break you and you could put yourself back together, different but whole. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, broken and grieving and barely surviving. And she thought about the woman she was now, holding her daughter in her arms, sitting beside the man she loved in the home they'd built together. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been pain and fear and moments when she'd wanted to give up. But she hadn't. She'd kept going, kept fighting, kept choosing to trust even when it terrified her. And that had made all the difference. Because here's the truth about second chances. They don't come wrapped in guarantees. They come messy and uncertain, full of risk and doubt. They ask you to be brave when you're scared, to hope when you've been hurt, to trust when trust is the hardest thing in the world. But if you're willing to take the leap, if you're willing to let people in even when your heart's still bruised from the last time, then sometimes, just sometimes, you find something worth all the fear. You find home. Elena looked at Colt, who was staring at their daughter with wonder in his eyes, and she knew she'd made the right choice. Every hard decision, every moment of doubt, every time she'd chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. It had all led her here, to this room, this family, this life, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. Years passed, and Iron Ridge became known across the territory as the best place to buy horses. Elena's reputation grew, and people came from miles away just to learn from her. She trained a whole generation of young hands, teaching them the same lessons she'd learned, that strength without trust is just force, that fear makes you cruel, and that the best things in life are built slowly, carefully, with patience and respect. Hope grew up strong and wild, riding before she could walk, fearless in the saddle, just like her mother. Colt tried to worry, but Elena just laughed. "She'll be fine," Elena would say. "She's got good instincts." And she did. On Hope's 5th birthday, Elena took her out to the pasture where Ash grazed. The mare was older now, slower, but still beautiful. "This is the horse that brought me and your daddy together," Elena told her daughter. Hope reached out and Ash lowered her head, letting the little girl stroke her nose. "She's pretty," Hope said. "She is. And she's special." Elena crouched down beside her daughter. Sometimes the things that save us aren't big or obvious. Sometimes they're small, quiet, easy to miss if you're not paying attention. Hope looked up at her, her dark eyes serious. "Like a horse? Like a horse. Or a person. Or a choice." Elena smiled. "The important thing is to notice them when they come, and to be brave enough to say yes." Hope nodded, even though Elena wasn't sure she understood yet. But she would. Someday. That night, after Hope was asleep, Elena and Colt sat on the porch, watching the stars. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of the day. "You ever miss it?" Colt asked. "The way things were before?" Elena thought about it. "Sometimes. I miss Thomas. I miss the person I was when life felt simple. But I wouldn't go back." She looked at him. "I love the life we've built, the family we've made. I love you." Colt pulled her close. "I love you too." They sat there in the darkness, and Elena felt the weight of everything they'd survived, everything they'd overcome. The truth was, life was still hard. There were bad seasons, and sick animals, and moments when money got tight. There were arguments and misunderstandings, and days when everything felt like too much, but they faced it together. And that made all the difference. Because somewhere along the way, Elena had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the pain. It was about learning to carry it without letting it define you. It was about choosing every single day to keep building even when the world tried to tear you down. It was about trust and hope, and the stubborn, beautiful belief that things could get better if you just refused to quit. Elena had been broken. She'd lost everything. She'd walked into Hollow Creek with nothing but a burlap sack and the will to survive. And now she had this, a home, a family, a future. Not because she was lucky, not because someone handed it to her, but because she'd chosen it every hard step of the way, and that was something no one could ever take from her. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant and beautiful. Somewhere in the barn, a horse whinnied. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the smell of earth and rain. Elena closed her eyes and breathed it all in. She was home, and she was never leaving.